I would like to welcome, at this point, Her Royal Highness, Princess Rym Ali. And I would like to introduce her as a co-chairperson of the Ubuntu United Nations, but also today as the guest speaker. I have got to become known to Princess Rym Ali, and I'm very honored by the fact that Her Royal Highness, Princess Rym Ali of Jordan, was a journalist, founded an NGO that aims to establish an Arab Center of Excellence for journalistic education. She had extensive career in international broadcasting, such as CNN and BBC and others. But she was awarded with several prizes also. She was given a distinguished prize by the president, Marcelo Rebelo de Souza, with the Order of Infant Dang Henry for her efforts in the field of cultural and intercultural exchange. Princess Rym Ali is the president of the Anna Lindh Foundation, and since September 2021, that has been the case. Her Royal Highness Princess Rym Ali of Jordan will now address us and give us her views on intercultural and interreligious experiences. Thank you, Princess. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Professor John Volmick. It is always a pleasure and an honor to speak at the same forum as yourself. And truly, I think everybody is extremely blessed that somebody such as you is involved in this. Your experience, your knowledge, and everything we learn from you all the time are really something special. So thank you so much. Dr. Rima, Monica Rocha-Imelo, dear Moses and Joanna, lovely to see you again. It's really a pleasure to be back on this forum with all the participants of the Ubuntu United Nations initiative to talk about bridge building. And there is so much bridge building to do across boundaries, of course, real or imagined, across cultures, across generations, across religions. I'd like to take a moment to reflect on the mere concept of building bridges. If you ask anyone, do you know what building bridges means? Of course, they'll immediately fire back and they'll say, yes, I do. Then you ask again, well, can you define it? Easy, they might say. It is what you do to help establish contact with between people. But then can you elaborate, you ask? Here, it becomes a little more complicated. Still, you will find most people can elaborate and say things like it is to help individual groups, even nations, learn how to work together or to reconcile if they've had differences. And then it becomes a little bit more complicated. You ask, have you personally had a direct experience with building bridges? And this is why we're lucky to have among us someone like Professor John Volmick, because most of the time here things become a bit more complicated and things aren't so easy. As Professor John Volmick said, quoting Nelson Mandela, everything can seem impossible until it is done. I guess it's my way of saying that we all hear about bridge building. We all know and we agree that it is a very attractive concept, but it is much easier to talk about it than to actually do it. As president of the Anna Lindh Foundation, I'm supposed to be an advocate for intercultural dialogue in the Euromed region. I accepted that role because I know that the Anna Lindh Foundation believes in doing, not just in talking, and actually engages with networks all around the region. But let's go back to the concept. For one, this concept, which is supposed to help us link or bridge cultures, has its own cultural specificity. It came, for example, to my attention recently that there are parts of the world, such as India, where the bridge is not what represents the link between cultures. In parts of India, the intercultural relation is crossed on a boat and by meetings from shore to shore, or meetings on the water by several boats. The intercultural relations includes meeting and trading. It's seen as a journey. A bridge is stable. but it might also be rigid, not flexible. A boat evokes transportation and exchange. And this metaphorical difference reveals itself by conceptual differences. But what binds these two ways of relating together, you will have guessed it, is the underlying principle of Ubuntu. Because whether we're crossing a bridge or trading goods or ideas or exchanging by boat, we remain individuals that are intrinsically and by necessity part of a whole composed of others. I am because you are. In my livelihood as a journalist, I must confess that I saw and covered more stories of bridges and boats, for that matter, being destroyed than being built. The former Yugoslavia, Rwanda, Lebanon, Iraq, Afghanistan. In Iraq, I felt very much like someone whose role was, as a journalist, to tell the truth, of course, but in so doing, to build bridges. I was in Baghdad before, during, and after the invasion of Iraq, and I was being asked questions live on air by presenters in the United States, and I was addressing viewers around the world. And often I was asked why US soldiers were dying in Iraq when they had, in their view, come to liberate Iraqis. And I felt then that I had to be that bridge, explaining to each what it was the other saw. I always imagined, for example, that there must be mothers in our audience searching for answers as to why their kids were at war in that country, just as there were mothers in Iraq wondering why the army that had come to liberate them was not able to restore electricity or make their country safe, and why sometimes innocent civilians died at their hands. In several places that I've covered or followed, I saw very brave attempts to actually rebuild the very bridges which had been destroyed. Remember those very places, the former Yugoslavia, Rwanda, Iraq, Lebanon. But destroying is done much faster than rebuilding. And that's why bridge building cannot be only what is done after the fact or after the conflict. It has to be practiced all the time, preventively. And the media, today especially social media, has a huge role to play in that. It plays a role positively or negatively, depending on how it is channeled and used. And I'd like to come back to that later. There's been much done to rebuild, but progress is not even. And often when we think peace has been achieved, we think peace has been achieved only to see conflict rear its ugly head again. Because it is not enough for leaders to shake hands. People have to be convinced so that support for peace transpires throughout the entire society, pardon me, for generations, mainly through education and culture, and the media, and through reducing gaps between the haves and have-nots. Remember Liberia, Sierra Leone, or the Congo, all through the years since its independence in 1960. And look at the brave people of Lebanon trying to prevent their country from sinking back into conflict as we speak. Ask the guests that you will hear from later. Ask them what their experiences was. Ask Professor John Volmink, who suffered throughout apartheid, yet came out with the desire and working to build bridges through schools. Ask our dear President Ramos Horta himself. He lived a conflict in his own country and then took a leading role in reestablishing a peace which has slowly taken root. And then he traveled the world trying to help extinguish the fires of a conflict in various ways. A discreet mediation here, a successful election there, and a UN report on how to reestablish peace where it has been broken. Remember in particular how dear President Ramos Horta worked to rebuild solid bridges between his country and Indonesia, the very neighbor and much more powerful country that had occupied his own small country and oppressed his people. Even if you're not, as these gentlemen, these people and men and women are, as Nelson Mandela was, building bridges at the scale of a nation, bear in mind that all our actions as individuals, as communities, have an impact. The Ubuntu philosophy says that we are all part of humanity, and each of us is also responsible for the well-being of the community. Looking at daily challenges, it's easy to despair and to say nothing will ever change, and to remain fixed in one's belief that we are right and the other is wrong. The media has played a wonderful role in bringing people together around ideas. There are now travel shows, cooking TV shows, where you can see and understand cultures from around the world. The media also plays a powerful role in holding leaders accountable, provided they share accurate information. A proper, balanced, professional public media has a very important role to play in that respect. And as Abraham Lincoln said, tell your people the truth and your country will be safe. I was very excited to see the delegate, Danica Selibits, and what she said about wanting to digitize society in a healthy way, because there is that other side to the media today, as you know. And a lot of the time in our daily social media conversations, there is confusion between facts and opinion. And we don't even have the awareness that there are other points of view and other possibilities. You explained how Facebook is blocking access to data about how much misinformation it spreads and who is affected. And these misconceptions about the other can be made by us all very easily, because thanks to the way algorithms work, we're often not even aware of the other's realities. We're familiar with some of their opinions, which we reject, but the algorithms don't only choose into what category you fall in order to feed you content. It also selects content for you, which means it hides content for you. Awareness about the media and social media in particular through media literacy, whether you attend a workshop or whether you educate yourself, is key. The American academic and activist Loretta Ross wrote about using the internet to call people in rather than call them out. Calling people out is something I'm sure you've seen. It's done so often through social media. It's very divisive. And she was once told, she recounts, by a reverend, that when you ask people to give up hate, then you need to be there for them when they do. And she soon realized, she says, that if a Black woman can learn to have civil conversations with someone who's been in the Ku Klux Klan, then we should be able to have conversations with everybody. Because we have to remember that there is humanity behind the words, and there is humanity behind the action. We can't dehumanize people simply because we disagree with their political perspectives. So by being more aware and in control of the content you receive and share, by using the technology at your fingertips to bond rather than divide, and by using critical thinking to question those who spread hatred, you are already building bridges. You're preventing words of hate from escalating into actions motivated by hate. And you can be there for those that you may have asked to give up hate. So I was also happy to hear Solange Torres earlier on, because she's working on bridging this technology gap. And what she's doing is very important. The speed with which artificial intelligence is gaining ground means that we all have to come together to understand it, to embrace its positive impacts, and also to overcome together the challenges it will pose to humankind. But what gives me hope is that humanity has existed across generations. In history, humanity has shown its resilience even after devastating strife. It's estimated that 3% of the world's population died as a consequence of World War II. Today, more than 75 years later, in Normandy, in the north of France, where the Allies landed to fight the Germans, people pay respect to those who have been laid to rest, almost side by side, in the American and German cemeteries. Even the resting grounds of old enemies are consecrated and maintained and visited by all. Last week, you may remember, I spoke about remembrances and commemorations, because building bridges has to start with the acknowledgement of the suffering of people. It is the foundation no one can skip or avoid. Any peace-building attempts, when that work of recognition of wrongs has not been fully explored and dealt with, are bound to remain superficial and not long-lasting. And that work allows boundaries to be torn down in our hearts and in our minds. It is never impossible, but it takes time. More recently, our common humanity emerged in force with the pandemic. Although we were made aware of the stark inequalities of people who live on our planet, we also felt a sense of belonging, all subject, as it were, to the same consequences imposed on us by the spread of the virus. And all of us practically at the same time, lockdown after lockdown, we felt with our fellow human beings in Wuhan, in Milan, in Algiers, or New York. But as I said earlier, building bridges can be preventive. In fact, it should be a goal we seek constantly to prevent us reaching situations where hatred turns into violence, when we do not realize that Ubuntu is not just wishful thinking, but a reality, that we are all linked to one another, and then there are consequences. If we do not share our planet Earth's resources with more equality, there will be more and more refugees. That is almost a mathematical, scientific equation. And if all of us don't take refugees in and don't give them equal access to education and don't allow for people to move freely to find more opportunities even before they become refugees, we are creating more inequality. Likewise, if we do not care for our planet and if we do not work together to keep ourselves healthy, we will have more pandemics. How amazing that we heard earlier from Amina Ghalib from Yemen, her country at war, and she is already planning about environment. This is amazing. You don't need to have followed the latest UN climate change conference to realize this. Was the spirit of Ubuntu flying around Glasgow? I think it was. The environment should ideally be one of the few causes that humans from north, south, east, and west can rally to protect, no matter what their political, religious, or cultural differences. Sir David Attenborough, in a presentation I would urge you all to watch and rewatch if you've already seen it, called for more equality and more sustainability. His short but powerful speech was greeted by resounding applause. He was heard and understood, witness the protests in Glasgow in the last couple of days. And the people in the room who listened and applauded are decision makers, those who can implement his message. When he concluded, "In my lifetime, I saw terrible decline. In yours, you can and should see a wonderful recovery. And that is why you are here." I think he was not only addressing leaders of the world, he was addressing all of you, young people listening to us now at this moment around the world. You should understand that Sir David Attenborough was also talking to you. In fact, I think he was addressing you, young people, even more than he was addressing the leaders that were assembled in Glasgow. The pandemic has already taught us a simple but all-important lesson. No one on this earth will be safe from it until we're all safe. We have learned the lesson, or have we? Is each and every one of us doing what he or she can to do to make themselves and all of us safe? There's an author called Todd Miller who's written a book called Build Bridges, Not Walls. He calls for a borderless world to solve global emergencies that threaten our collective survival. Karen Armstrong is a world-famous author who studied what the great monotheistic religions have in common and calls on all of us to be compassionate and apply the golden rule. Don't do to others what you do not want done to you. She's created an organization called the Charter of Compassion Organization. These are only a few ideas and thoughts that stem from the fact that as human beings, we can only be united. We can but live by taking the other into account. There are many more examples. There are people like Nelson Mandela who acted on all these ideas, who actually broke down barriers in his mind, in his heart, to the point that he learned the language of his oppressors to be able to better understand them and talk with them as an equal. And while he did not forget, he forgave and built bridges. There is an Arab proverb that says the 1,000-mile journey starts with one single step. And that step has to go in the right direction, that of realizing with absolute certitude that I am because you are, and that my DNA and yours go back to the same ancestors. So my humble message to you today is all of you sharing these moments with us. Get to know each other and start building bridges with one another. Gradually, together, win over the support and participation of others. As the late King Hussein said, we believe that peace is not just signed papers, but rather a contract between generations for the building of a more promising and less threatening future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Your Royal Highness, for the inspiration. And you talked of this from practical experiences, and you spoke about build bridging being something which needs to be proactive and not just an afterthought. You also interlinked with the role of media, and also especially digital media, in how it can be used, to promote dialogue, and also the dangers that are inherent in it, which need to be looked at. I took a quote which says that there's humanity behind the words. We should realize that there's humanity behind the words and humanity behind the actions, and thus we are all linked, and that there are consequences. Thank you, and also giving us the practical examples that you gave of Nelson Mandela, Karen Armstrong, of leaders who are actually who did something and who are doing something to promote building bridges. So at this time and juncture, we are going to be looking at, so there was an opportunity for young leaders to ask questions, and we received some questions. And I have two questions. I'll start with the first one, which comes from Muhammad Abbas, who's from Chad. I hope I pronounced it well. And the question that Muhammad asked is, how can we make youth of some countries, for example, mine in Chad, who are not as active in the context of building bridges and leadership, to become more dynamic and to be more engaged? What do you think needs to be done to bridge that gap?
Thank you so much, Moses, and thank you for the question, Mehmet. And I hope I pronounced the name correctly. Of course, civil society isn't always organized in the same manner, or maybe in an equal manner, all over the world. Of course, the internet is a formidable tool to help organize and mobilize. I think we're also aware that it can be a frighteningly dangerous instrument that can spread damaging lies and falsehoods. So it needs to be handled with care. But I think what I can say about the subject is that the youth everywhere should be active in reaching out to others and build bridges together with them. But at the same time, they should maybe be vigilant not to be led astray by falsehoods. And we saw where that led people, for instance, who were misguided in the United States, and they ended up trying to stage a coup on Capitol Hill in the US and rejecting the result of democratic elections. So awareness is crucial, but there are a lot of ways of educating oneself. The UNESCO website, and there are trusty websites of organizations with credibility, such as different UN agencies. The UNHCR, the agency that deals with climate, has also very good information. But being well and accurately informed, I would say, is already first very good step toward mobilization, because one cannot be fully aware of what is happening and then not act. If I'm not mistaken, your country, Chad, has a problem of desertification. It's had a huge impact. And maybe there needs to be some work, or there could be some work by organizing small communities. I think in any cases, everywhere in the world, it would help everyone to see, for instance, the immediate link between climate change and lack of environmental policies and poverty and immigration or emigration. What it means to cut trees, for example, and its direct impact on water scarcity, how immigrants should be perceived as assets rather than burdens. Participating in TV and radio debates, look at what's been done at local levels. There's meetings, among people in towns and villages, and even from other countries. We can learn from other people's solutions, and that's why this is such a fantastic forum, and adapt the interesting solutions to our own situations. There's a local NGO I'm familiar with here in Jordan. They went to a workshop in India and learned how to produce solar electricity. And a lot of people made fun of this one lady when she started trying to teach what she knew back home. But, she continued. And then the next thing we knew, she had set up this project with other women, and she took the lead, and she actually brought electricity to her entire village. So I think engaging on issues that are of direct concern and have direct impact on their lives might be one step. I hope that helps.